Vanessa Whitaker had built Whitaker and Associates from a two-person operation into one of Chicago's most respected architecture firms. And in 30 seconds of cold public fury, she may have just destroyed everything she'd spent a decade constructing. The man she fired wasn't a thief. He wasn't a troublemaker. He was the only person in that building who could save her. If you've ever misjudged someone based on what they were wearing instead of who they actually were, this story is for you. Stay with us until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning started the way most mornings at Whitaker and Associates started, with controlled, barely managed chaos. By 7:15, the 34th floor of the Meridian Tower was already humming. Architects bent over drafting tables, whiteboards were covered in red marker notations, and the coffee machine in the break room had been running continuously since 6:40. The air smelled like fresh paper and dry erase ink, and the particular kind of anxiety that lives inside a building full of people who know they're racing against something. In 4 days, Whitaker and Associates would present the final design package for the Lakeshore Pinnacle, a $60 million skyscraper commission that would, if secured, be the largest project in the firm's history. It would also be the project that finally silenced the industry voices that had been quietly, persistently whispering that Vanessa Whitaker had peaked. That she was talented, yes, but not exceptional. Good, certainly, but not great. Those whispers had been getting louder lately. Vanessa heard them. She always heard them. She had developed an almost pathological sensitivity to the ambient noise of other people's doubt over the years, the way some people develop sensitivity to changes in barometric pressure before a storm. She felt it in rooms before anyone said anything. She felt it in the slight hesitation before a client returned her call. She felt it in the way certain senior members of her own team, men who had been in the industry longer than her and never quite forgiven the universe for putting her in charge of them, asked their questions in meetings, politely, deferentially, with just enough edge underneath to let her know they were watching for her to stumble. She had not stumbled yet. She did not intend to. Vanessa's office occupied the northeast corner of the 34th floor, floor-to-ceiling glass on two sides, the Chicago skyline spread out behind her like something she'd personally arranged. The office was deliberately sparse. One desk, clean, dark walnut, nothing on it that didn't serve a purpose. 2 chairs for visitors. A credenza along one wall. On the credenza, a single-frame photograph of her and her mother taken at Vanessa's college graduation, the only personal item she permitted herself in the space. She'd read somewhere once that clutter was a form of delayed decision-making, and she had spent her entire adult life making decisions quickly. She did not allow clutter. She was 40 minutes into reviewing the structural narrative document for the Lakeshore Pinnacle when her phone buzzed. Investors moved the preliminary walkthrough. Tuesday, not Thursday. She stared at the message for 3 seconds. It was from Marcus Webb, the senior partner at the investment group funding the Pinnacle project. Marcus Webb was not a man who made idle changes. He moved things for reasons, and the reasons were rarely good. Tuesday meant they had 2 fewer days. 2 fewer days meant they needed to compress the final review cycle, which meant she needed her lead engineering team, specifically the structural analysis team, to have their revised load calculations on her desk by end of business today instead of Thursday morning. She was already reaching for her phone to call down to structural when her assistant, Priya, knocked twice on the open door and leaned in. "The 8:30 team check-in is ready," Priya said. She was 26, efficient in the way that only people who grew up watching chaos unfold and deciding early that they would not contribute to it tend to be. Also, facilities left a message. The main conference room projector is acting up again, so they've rerouted the presentation rehearsal to the secondary conference room on 33. "Fine," Vanessa said, already standing. "Tell Hendricks I need his team's load analysis by 4 o'clock, not Thursday. And if he tells you that's not possible, tell him I said it's not a request." Priya made a small sound that was not quite agreement and not quite sympathy and disappeared. The 34th floor's open studio was, at its best, a beautiful space to work. High ceilings, natural light from the south-facing windows. Long communal drafting tables arranged in clusters by project. The kind of physical collaboration space that architecture schools like to photograph for their brochures. At its worst, which was what it was this particular morning, It was a pressure cooker with better lighting. Vanessa moved through it the way she always moved through spaces she owned. Quickly, purposefully, making eye contact with people she needed to assess, and deliberately not making it with people who would interpret it as an invitation to update her on something. She had a gift for this, for moving through a room in a way that communicated exactly as much as she intended and nothing more. She was halfway to the conference cluster when she saw him. The janitor, Ryan, she thought his name was, one of the facilities staff who rotated through the building's upper floors, was standing at the far end of the main drafting table. The long table was partially cleared for the presentation rehearsal, but several large blueprint rolls had been left out, and one of them had apparently slipped off the end of the table and partially unrolled on the floor. The man was crouched down next to it, not picking it up, not rolling it back up. He was looking at it. Not the casual glance of someone who'd noticed something on the floor and was deciding whether it was their job to deal with it. He was studying it. His eyes were moving across the sheet the way you move your eyes across something when you're reading it, when you're actually processing what you're seeing. His head was slightly tilted. One hand was raised, not quite touching the paper, hovering an inch above it. Everything in Vanessa's body went cold, and then very, very still. Those blueprints were confidential. They were not, under any circumstances, per company policy she had written herself, to be reviewed by anyone outside the project team without a signed NDA and written authorization from her office. The Lakeshore Pinnacle design was proprietary. If even a rough version of it made it to a competitor before Tuesday's investor walkthrough, the damage would be... She crossed the floor in 12 steps. "Hey!" Her voice came out flat and sharp at the same time. The particular register she'd learned to use when she needed to shut something down immediately. Conversation stopped nearby. Heads turned. She was aware of this and didn't care. The man looked up. He was older than she'd expected up close. Mid-30s, maybe, with a face that had the kind of weathered quality that came from outdoor work or sustained stress or both. Dark hair, a little too long. Eyes that were calm in a way that struck her, briefly and irritatingly, as unusual. Most people looked startled when she came at them like this. He looked like he'd been expecting to have to explain himself and had already decided on what he was going to say. "These blueprints are confidential," she said. "What are you doing with them?" "They fell," he said. His voice was quiet, even, like someone who was choosing each word with some care. "I was going to bring them to whoever you were examining them." He paused. "I noticed something." "You noticed something?" She repeated it slowly, making sure everyone in earshot understood what was happening here. "You're in facilities. You are not authorized to look at project documents. You know that. That's in the employee handbook. It's in the facilities orientation packet. It's posted on the, I understand the policy," he said. "Then you understand what you just did." He didn't say anything else. He was still crouched down next to the blueprint, and he looked up at her with those infuriatingly calm eyes and something in his expression, not defiance, not guilt, something she couldn't quite name, made her angrier instead of less. "Stand up," she said. He stood. He was taller than she'd registered. He held the lanyard with his building access badge loosely in one hand, and she had the strange sense that he'd already taken it off before she'd told him to. "What's your name?" "Ryan Calloway." "Mr. Calloway." She said it precisely, the way you say a name when it's the last time you intend to use it in that context. "You violated company confidentiality policy. Your employment with Whitaker and Associates is terminated, effective immediately. Priya will arrange for your personal items to be sent to you. Please leave your access badge with security on your way out." The room was very quiet now. She was aware without looking that at least 15 people were watching. She didn't look away from Ryan Calloway. He looked at her for a moment. Just a moment. Then he reached up, unclipped the badge from the lanyard. It had clearly already been off the lanyard in his hand, she registered, and set it on the edge of the drafting table. Carefully. Not dropping it, not placing it with any kind of dramatic weight. Just setting it down. He didn't say anything. He picked up the mop handle he'd left leaning against the table leg, walked to the supply cart he'd left parked near the elevator bank, and wheeled it to the elevator. He pressed the button. The elevator opened immediately. He pushed the cart inside. The doors closed. Vanessa looked at the access badge on the corner of the table. Then she looked at the partially unrolled blueprint on the floor. Then she looked at the room full of people who were all suddenly very busy looking at anything that wasn't her. "Someone roll that back up," she said, and walked to the conference cluster for the 8:30 meeting. She was 3 minutes into the check-in when the first sign appeared that something was wrong. It was the look on Derek Cho's face. Derek was the lead structural engineer on the Lakeshore Pinnacle project, a meticulous, slightly humorless 38-year-old whose primary emotional register was professional concentration. He walked into the conference room 4 minutes after the meeting started, which was unusual. Derek was never late. And he was holding a blueprint roll, and he had an expression on his face that Vanessa had not seen on him before. He looked scared. "Sorry," he said, and then didn't explain the apology, which was also unusual. He sat down. He set the blueprint roll on the table but didn't open it. He folded his hands on top of it. He didn't say anything else. Vanessa let the meeting run for 7 more minutes. Project timeline, material coordination, Tuesday logistics. And then she stopped mid-sentence because Derek Cho's face was doing something it hadn't done in the 3 years she'd known him. It was getting worse. "Derek," she said, "what is it?" He looked at her. He looked at the other 4 people in the room. He looked back at her. "I need to show you something," he said, privately. Privately turned out to mean Derek, Vanessa, and Marcus Hendricks, who was the firm's technical director, and the person who signed off on all structural engineering before it went to the client. The 3 of them in the small glass-walled room that Vanessa used for sensitive conversations, the blind pulled down on the interior window, the door closed. Derek unrolled the blueprint on the table. It was sheet L17, the load distribution diagram for the Pinnacle's tower core, the piece of the design that everything else hung off of, structurally speaking. The piece that governed how the building would transfer its weight down through its skeleton into its foundation. "Walk me through it," Vanessa said. "The tributary load calculation for the transfer level," Derek said, and his voice was doing a thing that she found alarming, a kind of controlled steadiness that only appeared in people who were actively preventing themselves from doing something else. "The span-to-depth ratio on the secondary transfer beams, the way the numbers are presented here, they look right. They follow the format, but if you recalculate them manually against the actual live load projections from the geotechnical report, Derek." "The beams are undersized," he said, "by a significant margin. If this design goes to construction, the transfer level will fail load redistribution under any significant seismic or dynamic wind event. Not immediately. Maybe not for years, but at some point." "How significant a margin?" Hendricks said. Derek looked at him. "Significant enough that when I saw it, I called my graduate school structural professor to ask if I was reading it wrong." A pause. "I wasn't reading it wrong." The room was very quiet. "When did you find this?" Vanessa said. Derek didn't answer immediately. He looked at the blueprint. He smoothed a corner of it that didn't need smoothing. "That's the other thing," he said. Priya knocked on the glass door of the small conference room 14 minutes after Derek and Hendricks had gone back to the main floor to begin their own internal scramble. Vanessa had been sitting alone with the blueprint for those 14 minutes, which was not something she normally allowed herself to do. Sitting still with a problem before moving toward a solution. But she had needed those minutes. She had needed them because the magnitude of what she was looking at was not abstract. A $60 million commission, 4 days from the investor walkthrough. A structural error in the load-bearing core of the design that, if presented, would be caught. It would have to be caught by the investor's own engineering reviewers. And when it was caught, it would not simply be a correction. It would be a revelation. It would answer definitively the question of whether Whitaker and Associates could be trusted with a project of this scale. And it would answer it in the worst possible way. "Vanessa." Priya opened the door a crack. Her voice had that quality it got when she was delivering information she didn't want to deliver. "I think you need to come to the floor." "What is it?" "It's about the janitor." Vanessa looked up from the blueprint. "What about him?" Priya hesitated. "Kylie from graphics saw the whole thing this morning. She says she wants you to know that Mr. Calloway wasn't just looking at the blueprint. She says he looked upset when he was looking at it, like he'd seen something that bothered him. And she says right before you came over, he'd already taken his badge off. He was walking toward Derek's workstation. She thinks he was trying to... Priya. She thinks he was trying to report something. The room was quiet. Send her in, Vanessa said. Kylie Marsh was 23 years old, worked in the graphics and rendering department, and under normal circumstances operated with the particular combination of enthusiasm and anxiety that characterized most of the firm's junior staff. Under these circumstances, she walked into the small conference room with the expression of someone who had decided that telling the truth was important enough to override how frightened she was of the woman she was telling it to. Vanessa had always privately respected that quality in people. She did not show this. Sit down, she said. Tell me exactly what you saw. Kylie sat. She folded her hands on the table, which was a gesture that looked practiced, like she'd coached herself on it in the hallway. I was at the East Cluster, she said. The blueprint rolled off the table. It was the one Derek had left out last night, I think, because I saw it there when I came in this morning. Mr. Calloway, the janitor. He was mopping near the window and it rolled and hit his foot. He picked it up, started to roll it back up, and then he stopped. Stopped. He was looking at it, but Vanessa, Ms. Whitaker, the way he was looking at it. I've been here 2 years. I've watched a lot of people look at blueprints. He wasn't looking at it the way someone looks at something because it's interesting or because they're being nosy. He was looking at it the way Derek looks at something when something doesn't add up. She paused. You know that face Derek gets? Vanessa knew the face Derek got. He had that face, Kylie said, and then he unclipped his badge. That was before you came over. I want to be clear about that. He had already taken the badge off. And he started walking toward Derek's workstation. I thought he was going to leave a note or something, and that's when you came over, and then... She stopped. She looked at her hands. I should have said something right away. I know that. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. Vanessa looked at her for a moment. You can go, she said. Kylie stood. She moved toward the door and then stopped. He didn't say anything, she said. When he was leaving, he didn't argue or explain himself. He just left. She looked at Vanessa with the particular directness of someone young enough to still find silence in the face of injustice bewildering. I thought that was strange. If I'd been him, I would have said something. Yes, Vanessa said. You would have. Kylie left. Vanessa sat with that for approximately 30 seconds. Then she stood up, walked out of the conference room, crossed the main studio floor, and went directly to Marcus Hendricks' workstation. The janitor, she said, Ryan Calloway, pull his personnel file. Hendricks looked at her. I'm in the middle of... Hendricks. He pulled it. The file was thin. 7 months of employment at Whitaker & Associates through a contract facilities service. Prior employer listed as Calloway Structural Consulting, a one-person practice, evidently, registered in Illinois. Prior to that, a 6-year tenure at Atrion Engineering Partners, one of the Midwest's most respected structural engineering firms. Senior associate level. Education, BS Civil Engineering, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. MS Structural Engineering, same institution. Licensed Professional Engineer, State of Illinois. License lapsed. Date of lapse coinciding, roughly, with the date his consulting firm had been dissolved. Hendricks looked at the file over Vanessa's shoulder and was very quiet for a moment. He's a structural engineer, Hendricks said. He was, Vanessa said. She was already moving toward the elevator. She found him in the parking structure on level 2. He was sitting on a bench near the elevator landing. Not his car, just the bench, a functional concrete thing bolted to the wall near the stairwell door that was presumably there for people waiting to be picked up. He had a jacket on over his facilities uniform, and he had his phone in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. He was just sitting there in the way that some people sit when they're not waiting for anything in particular, when they've just run out of places they need to be. She almost stopped walking when she saw that, the stillness of it. She didn't stop. Mr. Calloway. He looked up, that same calm. She was starting to find it less irritating and more unsettling, the way you find something unsettling when you realize it's not a mask. "Ms. Whitaker," he said. She stood in front of him, and for a moment she didn't say anything because she was working out what to say, which was not a situation she was frequently in and which she did not like. She was very good at knowing what to say. It was one of the things she was known for. "You were a structural engineer," she said. Something moved across his face. Not surprise. He'd apparently decided, sitting here on this bench, that this was one of the ways this encounter might go. "I was," he said. "You spotted an error in the L17 load distribution diagram." He didn't say anything. "That's what you were looking at. That's why you took your badge off." He looked at her steadily. "I was going to leave it on Cho's desk with a note about the transfer level beams. The secondary span calculations. Someone ran the tributary load numbers against the wrong geotechnical baseline. The design would pass a routine review, but under real dynamic load conditions. I know what it would do," she said. "Then you know it's significant." "Yes," she said. "It's significant." She looked at him. He looked at her. In the parking structure, a car alarm went off one level down and then stopped. "I need you to come back upstairs," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Why?" he said. It was a reasonable question, and she didn't like it. "Because you're the person in this situation who can fix what you found," she said. "And because I made a decision this morning without enough information, and She stopped. She looked at a point approximately 4 feet to the left of his head. "I'm asking you to come back." He was quiet. "My daughter gets out of school at 3:15, he said. "I know. I'm not missing that. I'm not asking you to." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he looked at his phone. He looked at the wall. He looked at something that wasn't in the parking structure at all. "All right," he said, and stood. They rode the elevator back up to the 34th floor in silence. Vanessa stood with her arms at her sides and her eyes on the floor indicator numbers above the door, and she was aware, with a clarity that she found distinctly uncomfortable, that she had spent the better part of the last hour being systematically wrong about a person in a way that had concrete, expensive, possibly disastrous consequences. This had not happened to her before. Not at this scale. She had been wrong about clients, about timelines, about whether a particular design was ready for presentation. These were professional errors, the kind that came with the work and could be corrected with effort and expertise. She had never been wrong about a person in a way that cost her the one thing she was least willing to lose. The elevator stopped at 34. The doors opened. Ryan Calloway looked at the floor that had, about 45 minutes ago, seen him walk in the other direction. He looked at it without visible emotion, or rather with the absence of emotion that Vanessa was beginning to understand was not blankness, but containment. The face of someone who has learned, through some sustained experience of difficulty, to hold their reactions somewhere internal where they can't be used against them. She wondered briefly when he'd learned to do that. She didn't ask. "Derek Cho is the lead on the structural package," she said, stepping out of the elevator. "I'll take you to him." "I know where his workstation is," Ryan said quietly. Of course he did. He'd been mopping these floors for 7 months. She led him there anyway. The next 3 hours there was no word for them that was both accurate and professionally acceptable, so Vanessa settled internally on grueling and left it at that. Derek Cho's reaction to Ryan Calloway was, in its own way, as illuminating as everything else that had happened that morning. Derek was not a demonstrative man. He processed things internally and reported conclusions. When Vanessa walked Ryan to his workstation and explained in 8 words what the situation was, Derek looked at Ryan with the careful assessment of an engineer looking at load-bearing capacity, measuring, quietly, whether the structure would hold. "You saw the L17 error from a cold read," Derek said. It was not quite a question. "The geotechnical baseline is wrong," Ryan said. "Whoever ran those numbers used the preliminary soil boring report instead of the final. The bearing values are off by 18%, Derek said. "I found it 20 minutes ago. The final geotech report is dated 6 weeks after the structural drawings were issued. Someone should have flagged it for revision." The revision would have been routine, Ryan said, if it was caught when it should have been. They looked at each other. Engineers processing a problem. Vanessa watched them do it and felt something unusual, a species of being on the outside of something that had nothing to do with her authority or her title. "What's your background?" Derek said. "Structural, 6 years at Atrion. Before that, graduate research in seismic load modeling." Derek was quiet for a moment. "I remember Atrion's paper on the adaptive damper systems, mid-2010s. "I co-authored the second one," Ryan said. Derek looked at him, then he turned to Vanessa. "I'm going to need him," Derek said. It was not a request. "I know," Vanessa said. By noon, Ryan Calloway had a temporary desk at Derek's cluster and a stack of drawing sets in front of him and a cup of coffee that Priya had brought without being asked. He hadn't touched the coffee. He was working through the structural drawings with the focused, methodical pace of someone who had spent years doing exactly this and had not, at the cellular level, actually stopped. Vanessa watched him from across the floor for approximately 60 seconds. Then she made herself stop watching and went back to her own work, because there was work to do, and because watching was not useful, and because the thing she was feeling while watching was complicated, and she did not have space for complicated things right now. The thing she was feeling, if she had been honest about it, was something close to shame. Not the professional shame of having made a mistake. She could handle that. She had a relationship with professional failure that was, if not comfortable, at least functional. This was different. This was the particular discomfort of having looked at a person and seen only what they were wearing instead of what they contained, of having used her authority not to correct something but to silence it, of having stood in front of an entire room of her employees and demonstrated with complete confidence that she was wrong. She had been wrong before. She would be wrong again. She had never been wrong quite like this. At 2:45, Ryan stood up, straightened the drawings in front of him into a neat stack, and reached for his jacket. Derek looked up. "We're not 3:15, Ryan said. "I told you at noon. I need to leave by 2:50 to make the school." Derek looked at the stack of drawings. He looked at the timeline on the whiteboard behind his workstation. He looked like a man doing a calculation that involved variables he hadn't anticipated. "Right," he said. "Okay. I'll come back tonight," Ryan said. "After she's in bed. I can have the revised transfer level calculations to you by morning." Derek exhaled. "Yeah, okay, that works." Ryan picked up his jacket. He started toward the elevator. He had made it about halfway across the floor when Vanessa stepped out of her office and into his path. Not blocking him, just appearing there in the way that people who are used to occupying space tend to appear. He stopped. She had been working up to saying something since noon and had not, in the intervening hours, settled on what that something was. She had a version of it. It was formal and measured and acknowledged the situation without overcorrecting in a way that might be perceived as weakness. She did not say the formal version. "I should have let you explain," she said. "This morning, I should have given you 30 seconds. He looked at her. "I didn't," she said, "and I'm not going to make that something I dress up into something smaller than it was." Ryan was quiet for a moment. He looked at a point past her shoulder, then back at her. "I've been looked at like that before," he said. "You weren't the first." "That doesn't make it—" "No," he said, "it doesn't. But it means I know the difference between someone who sees what they want to see and doesn't care, and someone who—" He stopped. He looked at her with those even, careful eyes. "You came to the parking garage yourself." She didn't say anything. "Most people send someone, like," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact he was noting, the way you note a load calculation. "Here's the number. Here's what it tells you." The elevator dinged. He glanced at it. "I'll be back tonight," he said, and walked to the elevator, and the doors opened, and he went down. Vanessa stood in the middle of the floor and looked at the closed elevator doors. Priya appeared at her shoulder. "The investors confirmed Tuesday's walkthrough is at 10, Priya said. "They're sending their own engineering reviewer." "I know," Vanessa said. "Are we going to be ready?" Vanessa looked at the closed elevator doors for another moment. Then she turned back toward her office. "Yes," she said. We're going to be ready. She walked back to her desk, sat down, and picked up the phone to call Marcus Hendricks. There were 16 hours until Ryan Calloway would come back with revised calculations. 16 hours in which the rest of the firm had work to do. She had wasted enough of them already. Outside in the November afternoon, Ryan walked to his car. A 10-year-old Subaru that had a scratch on the rear passenger door he kept meaning to get touched up, and sat in it for a moment before starting it. He put his hands on the wheel. He looked at the parking structure wall in front of him, which was concrete and unpainted, and had a small drainage crack running diagonally across one section. He thought about the L17 drawings. The specific way the numbers had been wrong, not randomly wrong, not carelessly wrong, but wrong in a way that was careful. Wrong in a way that would survive a routine review. Wrong in a way that would only become visible to someone who was looking at the whole picture, who knew which baseline document to compare against, who understood how the geotechnical report fed into the load distribution model. He thought about the way Derek Cho had looked at him when Ryan had named the specific error. He thought about Vanessa Whitaker standing in the parking garage, not sending someone, coming herself. He turned the key. The Subaru started. He pulled out of the space and wound down toward the exit, and when he got onto the street, he turned left toward the elementary school where his daughter Maisie was currently in her afternoon reading block, completely unaware that her father's day had been, by any reasonable measure, the strangest he had experienced in some time. He was going to pick her up and take her to the park and buy her a hot chocolate from the cart near the fountain if it was still operating in November, and he was going to let her talk at him for the entire drive, and the entire walk and the entire hot chocolate, and he was going to listen to every word. And then, after she was asleep, he was going to come back to the 34th floor of the Meridian Tower and fix what he'd found in the drawings. Not because he owed Vanessa Whitaker anything, because the building, if it was built wrong, would stand for decades over people who never knew it was wrong. Because that mattered more than what had happened to him today. Because it had always mattered more. That was the part of him that the last 3 years hadn't been able to change, no matter how hard the last 3 years had tried. He signaled, merged, and drove through the gray Chicago afternoon toward his daughter. The park near Maisie's school had a fountain that was, as Ryan had suspected, not operating in November. The basin had been drained and covered with a plywood board, and someone had written, "See you in spring" on it in blue spray paint. Maisie had read this aloud, decided it was sad, and then immediately moved on to telling Ryan about a disagreement she'd had with her best friend over which animal would win in a race between a cheetah and a motorcycle, which was apparently a debate of significant importance in the second grade. "The cheetah can't follow a road," she explained. They were sitting on the bench nearest the covered fountain, sharing a bag of pretzels Ryan had bought from the gas station 2 blocks over because the hot chocolate cart was also not operating. So it would have to go through fields and stuff, and the motorcycle stays on the road, but the cheetah doesn't have to stop at red lights. "That's a real variable," Ryan said. "I said the cheetah wins because of the red lights. Emma said the motorcycle wins because roads are faster than fields." Maisie considered this. "We're both right, I think. It depends on the course." "That's actually a pretty sophisticated conclusion." She looked at him. She was 7, with her mother's eyes and Ryan's tendency to go quiet when she was thinking hard about something. The combination, in her, read as a kind of preternatural seriousness that her teachers consistently described in parent-teacher conferences that mature for her age, and that Ryan privately described as slightly heartbreaking in the way that all evidence of his wife living on in his daughter was slightly heartbreaking. Beautiful and sharp at the same time, like something you were glad to hold but had to be careful with. "You look tired," Maisie said. "I had a strange day." "Good strange or bad strange?" He thought about it. "Still working that out." She accepted this. She took a pretzel. "Can we have pasta tonight?" "We can have pasta tonight." They sat there for a while in the gray afternoon, eating gas station pretzels next to a fountain that was waiting for spring, and Ryan let it sit inside him. The day, the drawings, the parking garage, Vanessa Whitaker's face when she'd said, "I should have let you explain." He let it sit without poking at it. He was good at that, or he had learned to be. He got Maisie home, fed her pasta with the jarred marinara she preferred over anything he made from scratch, helped her through 20 minutes of reading homework, and had her in bed by 8:30. She was asleep by 8:37. He could tell by the way her breathing changed through her bedroom door, the slight deepening of it, the way her restless pre-sleep shifting stopped. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he got his jacket and his laptop bag, left the key under the mat for Mrs. Okafor across the hall, who had a spare and knew the arrangement, and drove back to the Meridian Tower. The 34th floor at 9:15 at night was a different place than the 34th floor at 8 in the morning. Most of the overhead lights were on a dimmer timer, dropped to 60% after 6, which gave the studio a quality that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, just reduced, like a space that was resting. The city was fully visible through the south windows now, the lake beyond it a dark edge against the lit grid of the shoreline. Derek was still there. Ryan had not expected him to be, and then had expected him to be because the timeline was what it was, and Derek Cho was clearly a man who stayed. There was one other person at a workstation across the floor. A woman Ryan didn't know, working on something unrelated, headphones on, not looking up. And at a cluster near the window, bent over a spread of drawings with a red pencil, was a man Ryan recognized from his months on this floor, Harrison Webb, one of the firm's senior principals. Mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of handsome that was mostly confidence. He had a reputation on the floor. Ryan had gathered this through 7 months of mopping around conversations, for being the kind of person who filled rooms without appearing to try. Ryan had, over those 7 months, developed a quiet, evidence-based impression of Harrison Webb that he had never said aloud to anyone. He filed that impression away now and went to Derek's cluster. "You're actually here," Derek said. "I said I would be." "I know, I just—" Derek stopped. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Long day." "I know." Ryan set his bag down and pulled up a chair. "Show me where you are." They worked for 2 hours without stopping. Ryan had brought his own calculations. He'd done preliminary work at the kitchen table after Maisie fell asleep, hand computations on a legal pad because he didn't have structural software on his personal laptop, and he'd needed to do something with his hands while the pasta was cooking. The hand calculations were close enough to confirm the direction. Derek had the software. What they found, working backward through the drawing set, was worse than the L17 sheet alone. The error in the tributary load model wasn't isolated. It propagated through the design in the way that foundational errors do, quietly, spreading through dependent calculations, leaving traces in 3 other sheets that would have looked correct in isolation and wrong, only when you laid them against each other and compared the underlying assumptions. "This is a lot of work for one mistake," Ryan said. He said it carefully, without inflection. Derek looked at him. "What do you mean?" "A mistake is a missed cross-check. One sheet, one baseline document, one number entered wrong." Ryan tapped the spread of drawings in front of them. "This is 4 sheets. The error is consistent across all of them. The wrong geotechnical baseline was applied consistently and correctly. The calculations are internally coherent. They're just built on a wrong foundation." Derek was quiet. "Someone who made an error wouldn't get this kind of consistency," Ryan said. "An error has friction. It produces inconsistencies downstream because the rest of the work is still being done right. This has no friction. The wrong number was used, and then every subsequent calculation was done correctly using that number." Derek looked at the drawings. He looked at Ryan. "You're saying someone did this on purpose?" "I'm saying the pattern looks deliberate." They sat with that for a moment. If that's true, that's not an engineering problem," Derek said. "No," Ryan said. "It's not." Vanessa was in her office. Ryan hadn't noticed the light in her office when he'd come in. It was set back from the main floor, and the interior blinds had been half drawn. But when he walked across the floor to refill his coffee from the break room at 11:30, he could see her through the glass. She was at her desk. She had a set of drawings open in front of her, and she was on the phone, and the call did not appear to be going well based on the angle of her shoulders. He refilled his coffee and went back to Derek's cluster. "She's been here since 7 this morning," Derek said without looking up. He'd noticed Ryan noticing. "I don't think she's left." Ryan didn't say anything to that. They worked another hour. At 12:40, Derek leaned back in his chair and put his hands over his face. "I need to tell you something," Derek said from behind his hands. Ryan waited. Derek lowered his hands. He looked at the drawings. He had the expression of a man who had been carrying something and had decided at some point in the last hour to put it down. The drawing revision log, he said. I went through it this afternoon. The L17 sheet was revised 6 weeks ago. The revision was minor, notation change, no engineering content flagged. But the baseline reference in the load calculations was changed at the same time. The change is in the metadata of the CAD file. It wasn't documented in the revision cloud on the sheet itself. Ryan looked at him. Who made the revision? The file log shows it was made under Marcus Hendricks' credentials, Derek said. But Hendricks was in Portland 6 weeks ago. I know because I covered a client call for him. He wasn't here. Ryan looked at the drawings on the table. Someone used his login, he said. Or he let someone use it, Derek said, which he would never do, I don't think. Hendricks is a lot of things, but he's not careless with access credentials. The more likely reading is someone else accessed his workstation. Or had his password. Yeah. Ryan looked across the floor toward the cluster near the window where Harrison Webb had been working. The cluster was empty now. He didn't know when Webb had left. Derek, he said, how long has Webb been a principal here? Derek looked at him. Something crossed his face, the recognition that Ryan had arrived at the same place Derek had probably been circling for hours. 11 years, Derek said. He was here before Vanessa. He was in line to make managing partner when the ownership restructured, and she came in as CEO instead. Ryan thought about that. Does he have access to other principals' workstation credentials? He shouldn't, Derek said. But he's been here 11 years. He knows where things are. He knows people. He paused. He was on the technical review committee for the Pinnacle project until Vanessa restructured it in September. He was removed from the committee. Ryan looked at the empty workstation across the floor. Has anyone flagged this to Vanessa yet? He said. No, Derek said. I wanted to be sure first. I'm not... This is a serious accusation. Hendricks' name is on the file log. If I bring this to Vanessa and I'm wrong about what it means... You're not wrong about what the file log shows, Ryan said. What it means is her problem to determine, but she needs to know. Derek looked at his phone. It was nearly 1 a.m. Yeah, he said. She does. But they found Vanessa still at her desk. She looked up when they knocked on the open office door with the particular alertness of someone who hadn't actually been close to sleep, just close to stillness. What is it? She said. Derek walked her through it. He was methodical and careful and presented the information in the sequence he and Ryan had assembled it, which Ryan appreciated. It made the conclusion feel like what it was, the product of evidence rather than accusation. Vanessa listened without interrupting. She had gone very still in the way Ryan was beginning to associate with her when she was processing something serious, the stillness of a building under load, where the visible thing was motionless and the real work was happening invisibly inside the structure. When Derek finished, the office was quiet. The file log shows Hendricks' credentials, she said. Yes, Derek said, but Hendricks was in Portland. I know he was in Portland. I sent him there. She looked at the drawings Derek had brought in, spread on the corner of her desk. The revision committee restructure in September. Who was unhappy about it? Derek looked at Ryan. Vanessa caught the look. Her eyes moved to Ryan, who had been standing slightly back near the door, because this was Derek's information to deliver, and Ryan was aware that his presence in this room was still, technically, unusual. Say it, she said. Ryan looked at her. I don't know the internal politics here well enough to say it with confidence. You were here every day for 7 months, Vanessa said. You moved through this floor invisibly. Say it. That landed somewhere, so the word invisibly, the particular honesty of it. He looked at her for a moment. Webb was at a workstation near the structural cluster when I came in tonight, he said. He left sometime before midnight. In the 7 months I was on this floor, I noticed he spent a lot of time in spaces he didn't need to be in, workstations that weren't his, equipment rooms. He was the kind of person who was always present in a way that looked casual but covered a lot of ground. He stopped. He knew where things were, Ryan said. That was my impression of him. He made it his business to know where things were. Vanessa looked at the drawings on her desk. She put her hand flat on sheet L17, not pointing at anything, just placing her hand there, the way you put your hand on something when you're making yourself feel the weight of it. If this reaches the investors before I do, she said quietly, to no one specifically, the framing controls the narrative. If it reaches them first as a design failure, it's a design failure. If it reaches them as a discovered and corrected sabotage, it's a different story. She paused. We have until 10 Tuesday morning. Ryan can have the revised structural package done by Monday afternoon, Derek said, if he works Sunday. Vanessa looked at Ryan. Can you? She said. He thought about Maisie's Sunday. He thought about the park and the covered fountain and a cheetah racing a motorcycle through a hypothetical field. He thought about what it would mean to say yes to this, what it would start. I'll need the full geotech report, he said, the final version, and access to your structural analysis software. You'll have both, she said. He nodded. Vanessa looked at both of them and then looked at her desk and then looked at the window, at the city outside, the lake invisible now beyond the lit distance of the shoreline. Go home, she said. Both of you. You're useless to me, exhausted. She said it without warmth and without coldness, just as a functional statement of fact. Be back at 8. Derek gathered his drawings. He and Ryan walked out. In the elevator, Derek looked at Ryan and let out a long breath. You know what the strangest part of today was? Derek said. Ryan looked at him. She came and got you herself, Derek said. From the parking garage, Priya told me. He shook his head slightly. In 11 years, I have never seen Vanessa Whitaker go get someone herself. Ryan looked at the floor indicator numbers, 34, 33, 32. She needed something done, he said. Sure, Derek said. But that's not why. Ryan didn't answer that. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. They walked out into the lobby and through the glass doors into the cold Chicago night, where the wind off the lake was cutting and direct and didn't care at all what kind of day anyone had. Ryan pulled his jacket tighter, walked to his car, and sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. He thought about the drawings. He thought about the 4 sheets and the consistent error in the file log with a name attached to it that probably wasn't the right name. He thought about Harrison Webb sitting at the cluster near the window, working late, the picture of dedication. He thought about what it cost to try to burn something down from the inside, the patience of it, the sustained, deliberate patience of someone who had decided that if they couldn't have a thing, the right response was to make sure no one else could either. He had known people like that. He understood in the abstract how you became that way. He didn't have a lot of sympathy for it, but he understood it. He started the car and drove home through the empty streets. Mrs. Okafor had left a note under his door. All quiet. She asked for water at 9 but went right back. Good kid. He put the note on the kitchen counter. He checked Maisie's door. She was asleep, one arm thrown over her head, the nightlight casting its small warm circle across the floor. He stood there for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen table, sat down, and opened his laptop. Not the structural calculations. Those could wait until morning. Instead, he opened a document he hadn't touched in 14 months. The draft of a project proposal he'd started for Callaway Structural Consulting, back when he'd still thought the firm might be salvageable, back before everything else had made the question irrelevant. He read the first paragraph. Then he closed the laptop. He wasn't ready for that yet. But he noticed that he'd opened it. He filed that away, the way he filed things, quietly, without making too much of it, and went to bed. Saturday arrived the way Saturdays do when you have a 7-year-old, suddenly, loudly, and with specific demands. Maisie wanted pancakes with the blueberries, not the frozen ones, the real ones, which meant Ryan was at the grocery store by 8:15 with his daughter riding the cart like a ship's figurehead through the produce section, one arm extended, pointing at things she wanted to evaluate. He bought the blueberries. He bought the orange juice she liked that came in the small bottles. He bought the particular brand of syrup she would accept, and the one she wouldn't, and he made the pancakes at the kitchen counter while she sat on the high stool and told him about a dream she'd had involving a library where all the books were about dogs. Every single book, she said. Even the math ones. Like, here's how to count. But dogs. That sounds like a good library, Ryan said. I want to go back, she said. Can you dream the same dream twice? Sometimes. How do you make it happen? I don't think you can make it happen, he said. I think it just does or it doesn't. She considered this with visible dissatisfaction. the expression of someone who preferred systems that responded to effort. Then she ate her pancakes. By 10, she was at the neighbor's apartment, the Garcias, whose daughter Sophia was Maisie's closest friend, and whose Saturday morning routine involved animated movies and a level of snack variety that Ryan could not compete with. And Ryan was back at the kitchen table with the Lakeshore Pinnacle structural drawings spread across every available surface, his laptop open to the structural analysis software Derek had granted him remote access to the night before, and a second cup of coffee going cold at his elbow. He worked. The thing about structural engineering that people outside the field rarely understood was that it was not, at its core, a mathematical discipline. The math was the tool. The actual work was reading a building, understanding how it wanted to stand, where it was in tension with its own design, where it was carrying more than it knew it was carrying. Good structural engineers didn't just calculate, they listened to the geometry. Ryan had been good at it. He had been, in the years before everything changed, genuinely good at it in the way that only came from caring about the work beyond what the work required. He'd forgotten, in 3 years of mopping floors, how much he missed that feeling. The Pinnacle design was elegant in its bones. Whoever had done the original structural concept, Derek, he suspected, or someone Derek had supervised closely, had understood the building's basic logic and worked with it rather than against it. The tower's core was configured to handle lateral loads efficiently. The transfer level, which was where the air lived, was the critical junction between the tower's upper mass and the podium structure below, and fixing it wasn't a matter of simply recalculating the beams. It meant tracing the load path through the entire system, verifying that each correction didn't create a new imbalance somewhere else. It was the kind of problem that couldn't be rushed. It could only be worked. He worked it. At 2 in the afternoon, his phone rang. He looked at the screen, V. Whitaker. He stared at it for a moment, which he recognized as slightly ridiculous, and answered. "Calloway," he said, out of old habit. His name, not a greeting, the way he'd answered his phone when he had an office and a title and calls that came with stakes attached. There was a brief pause on the other end, just enough for him to register that the habit had surprised her. "It's Vanessa," she said. "How are the calculations going?" "On track. Derek said you'd need until Monday afternoon." "That's still accurate?" Another pause. This one was different. Not processing, but something adjacent to reluctance, which was interesting on her. The way unfamiliar expressions are interesting on faces you're starting to learn. "I need to tell you what I found this morning," she said. She had apparently not gone home after he and Derek had left at 1 in the morning. Or she had gone home briefly and come back, which amounted to the same thing. She had pulled Harrison Webb's building access logs herself, not through IT, directly through the building security system that she had administrative credentials for, and she had cross-referenced them against the dates and times embedded in the L17CAD file metadata. 6 weeks ago, on the night the load calculation baseline had been changed, Harrison Webb's building access card had registered entry to the building at 11:47 p.m. and exit at 1:23 a.m. The structural drafting workstations logged remote activity from Hendricks' credentials between 12:03 and 1:16 a.m. "He was in the building," Vanessa said. "Hendricks was in Portland, but Webb was here at midnight and Hendricks' workstation was active." Ryan kept his eyes on the drawing in front of him. "That's not proof of what he did with it." "No," she said, "it's not. But here's what else I found." He heard paper moving. Webb submitted a formal complaint to the board 8 months ago, before the investor process for the Pinnacle started. The complaint was about my management of large-scale project risk. He argued that I was pursuing contracts beyond the firm's current technical capacity, and that without stronger principal oversight, his phrase, the firm was exposed to liability. She paused. The board filed it. Nothing came of it. But the paper trail exists. Ryan thought about a man who had been in a room for 11 years watching someone else run it. He wanted the Pinnacle to fail. He wanted me to fail, Vanessa said. The Pinnacle was the instrument. Her voice was flat, but flat in the way that covered something with a lot of density underneath it. If we'd presented that design on Tuesday, and the investor's engineering reviewer caught the structural error, and they would have caught it, Ryan, their reviewer is good, the narrative writes itself. CEO overreaches on flagship project. Fundamental structural flaw in $60 million design. Board removes CEO, installs senior principal as interim leadership. She stopped. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. The apartment was quiet. Outside, a car passed on the street below. "What are you going to do with it?" Ryan said. "I'm going to confront him on Monday morning," she said, "before the presentation rehearsal. I'm going to put what I have in front of him and give him the opportunity to resign. And if he doesn't, then I'm going to the board with everything. The access logs, the file metadata, the complaint, all of it." She paused. "My general counsel is reviewing the material this weekend." "Does he know you know?" "I don't think so," she said. "He came in this morning. I saw him on the security feed. He spent 2 hours at his workstation and left. He looked normal. He looked like a man who thinks he's winning." Ryan thought about that. The specific confidence of someone who believed their work was invisible. He'd seen that kind of confidence before, and it was always, in his experience, the confidence of someone who hadn't yet considered all the ways they might be seen. "There's something else," Vanessa said. He waited. "I looked at your personnel file yesterday," she said. "The full one, not just the employment record. There's a next of kin contact listed. Maisie Calloway, age 7, listed as dependent." A pause. "There's no second parent listed." The kitchen was very quiet. "No," Ryan said. "There isn't." She didn't ask the follow-up question. He was aware of it hanging there, and he was aware that she'd chosen not to ask it, which was its own kind of answer about her. "The reason I'm telling you," she said carefully, "is that I want to understand what I'm asking of you this weekend. And on Monday, you have a daughter. You walked away from this industry for a reason. I don't want to—" She stopped. She started again. "I want to make sure you know that whatever happens with the Pinnacle, your involvement in this will be acknowledged, publicly. I'm not asking you to fix something and then disappear." Ryan looked at the drawings on the kitchen table. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said. It came out evenly, not because he was unaffected, but because he had learned over those 3 years how to carry the sentence without dropping it. "Aneurysm. She was 32. I had a 7-month-old in a structural engineering firm and about 4 weeks of functional capacity before I had to start making decisions about which of those things I could sustain." He paused. "The firm didn't make the cut." Vanessa was quiet. "I'm not asking for—" he started. "I know you're not," she said. He looked out the window at the street below. A kid on a bicycle, November light, thin and flat. "She was an architect, actually. Interior design. She would have had opinions about the Pinnacle." "What kind of opinions?" He almost smiled. "Strong ones. She always thought structural engineers over-engineered the bones and underthought the skin. She said you could always tell a building designed by someone who'd never had to live inside one." "She wasn't wrong," Vanessa said. "No," Ryan said. "She usually wasn't." The conversation went quiet for a moment, but it was a different kind of quiet than the ones earlier. Not the quiet of two people calculating, but the quiet of two people who had briefly, without quite planning to, let something real pass between them. "I'll have the revised package ready Monday afternoon," Ryan said, "by 3 at the latest." "I'll have a workstation set up for you," she said. "And Ryan—" She stopped. She seemed to weigh the rest of it. "Thank you. For coming back. You didn't have to." "No," he said. "I didn't." He hung up. He sat for a moment with the phone in his hand, then he put it face down on the table, picked up his pencil, and went back to the drawings. Sunday was Maisie, deliberately and entirely. Ryan had made himself a rule when she was about 18 months old, and he'd realized that grief, if you let it, would colonize every available hour. 1 day a week, entirely hers, no exceptions. Sunday was that day. They went to the Children's Museum on the north side. Maisie's current obsession was the engineering exhibit, which Ryan found either ironic or appropriate and had decided was both. She spent 45 minutes at the bridge building station, testing different configurations of foam blocks over a plastic river, narrating her own design choices with the seriousness of someone filing a technical report. "The arch is strongest," she announced, "because the weight goes sideways instead of down." "Where'd you learn that?" "You told me," she said, without looking up. "Like a year ago." I remembered. He hadn't remembered telling her. He wondered what else she'd absorbed without him realizing she was paying attention. They ate lunch in the museum cafe. Grilled cheese, apple slices, the lemonade she considered a special occasion drink. She talked about Sophia and the animated movie they'd watched, and a book she wanted from the library. He listened to all of it with the specific quality of attention that parenthood had taught him, not waiting for a pause, not planning his response, just actually listening, the way he wished he'd been better at before he understood how much of it was finite. On the drive home, she fell asleep in the back seat. He drove the long way through the lakefront stretch where you could see the water, and he thought about the pinnacle and the transfer level and the corrected load path and what it would mean to walk into that investor presentation on Tuesday and stand at the front of the room. He thought about standing at the front of a room in a janitor's uniform with a CEO who had fired him standing to his left. He thought about what Maisie would make of that story when she was old enough for it. He thought she'd probably have a strong opinion. Then, Monday morning came cold and clear. Ryan dropped Maisie at school at 7:55. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment after she disappeared through the doors. Her backpack was slightly too big for her, a fact she rejected every time he suggested getting a smaller one because she liked the one she had. And then he walked back to his car and drove to the Meridian Tower. He had the revised structural package completed by 2:45 p.m., the corrected load calculations, the updated drawing set for the transfer level, verification runs showing the revised design performing correctly under 4 different dynamic load scenarios. He printed everything and put it in a drawing tube and carried it to Derek's workstation. Derek spent 15 minutes going through it. He didn't say much while he was reading. At the end of 15 minutes, he looked up. "This is solid," Derek said. "This is really solid, Ryan. Any issues with the L23 revision? I changed the connection detail at the—" "No, I saw it. It's right. It's actually better than the original. The redundancy you added to the secondary connection is something I should have included in the first pass." Derek set the drawings down. He looked at Ryan with the expression of someone working up to something. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you leave Atrion? 6 years, senior associate level. That's not a career you leave unless something serious happened." Ryan looked at the drawing tube in his hands. "My wife died. I had a 7-month-old. I wasn't functional." "But after is complicated," Ryan said. "After I tried to rebuild the consulting practice. It didn't get traction fast enough and I ran out of runway." He paused. "I took the facilities job because it was available and it paid enough and it had flexible hours. I wasn't thinking about much beyond that." Derek nodded slowly. He looked like he wanted to say something and was deciding whether it was his place. "For what it's worth," Derek said, "what you did this weekend, that's not the work of someone who used to be good at this. That's the work of someone who still is." Ryan didn't answer that. He set the drawing tube on the desk. "Is she in yet?" he said, meaning Vanessa. "She's been in since 6, Derek said. "She's with Webb right now." The meeting between Vanessa and Harrison Webb lasted 41 minutes, which Ryan knew because he was at the workstation Derek had set up for him and could see Vanessa's office from the angle of his chair. And he watched the time in the corner of his laptop screen the way you watch something you're not sure is going to hold. He couldn't hear anything. The glass was thick. He could see body language. Webb's body language, for the first 20 minutes, was the body language of a man who didn't know what was coming and was trying to project normalcy. Relaxed in the chair. Occasional gestures. At one point he laughed. A short, easy laugh at something Vanessa apparently said. The laugh of a man at a meeting who didn't know it was an ambush. Then Vanessa put something on the desk between them. The laugh stopped. For the next 10 minutes, Webb's body language was the body language of a man trying to find the room he'd been in before and discovering it was gone. He leaned forward. He shook his head. He said something that involved his hands moving in a particular way. Denial. the specific physical grammar of it. Vanessa didn't move much. She sat with her hands flat on the desk and let him talk. Then she said something that made him go still, completely still, the kind of stillness that isn't calm at all. Derek had appeared at Ryan's shoulder without him noticing. "How's it looking?" Derek said quietly. "She's winning," Ryan said. Derek looked at the office. "He thought he had more time," he said. "That's the thing about people like that. They always think they have more time." At minute 38, Webb stood up. He straightened his jacket. His face had the particular set of a man who was trying to retain the appearance of control over something he no longer controlled. He said something brief. Vanessa said something in return and gestured toward the door. He walked out. He crossed the main floor without looking at anyone. He walked to his own office and 12 minutes later walked back out with his jacket and a briefcase and got in the elevator. The doors closed. The floor was very quiet for a moment. People were looking at the elevator, and then at each other, and then at things on their desks because none of them wanted to be caught looking at either. Priya appeared from the direction of Vanessa's office. She crossed to Ryan's workstation. "She'd like to see you," Priya said. "And Derek, when you have a moment." Ryan capped his pen. He and Derek walked to Vanessa's office. She was standing at the window when they came in. The city behind her, the lake somewhere in the gray distance beyond it. She turned when they entered, and she looked like a person who had just done something that had cost her something, even though it was the right thing. The particular look of someone who understood that doing right and feeling fine about it were not the same operation. "He resigned," she said. "Effective immediately. I've informed the board and our general counsel." She looked at Derek. "The access logs and the CAD file metadata will go to outside counsel for review. Whether there's any further legal action taken will depend on what they find." She paused. "But he's gone." Derek let out a breath, a long one. "The presentation is tomorrow at 10, Vanessa said. She looked at the drawing tube Ryan was holding. "Is the structural package ready?" "Yes," Ryan said. She looked at him for a moment. She looked at him the way she hadn't looked at him on Friday morning. Not past him, not through the frame of what he was wearing, but at him, the actual specific person standing in front of her. "I want you to present it," she said. "The structural section, Tuesday morning, to the investors." Ryan looked at her. "You have structural staff who—" "I want you to present it," she said again. "You found the error. You fixed it. You understand every number in that package better than anyone in this building right now." She held his gaze. "And I think the investors should meet the person whose work they're actually approving." Ryan thought about standing in front of a room. He thought about Maisie's backpack, slightly too big, disappearing through a school door. He thought about a document on his laptop that he'd opened Friday night and closed again because he wasn't ready. He thought that maybe ready and necessary were different questions. "All right," he said. Vanessa nodded. Something in her face shifted slightly. Not relief exactly, but an adjacent thing, the easing of a weight she'd been holding for long enough that she'd stopped noticing it. "Be here at 8, she said. "Both of you." They left her in her office with the city behind her and the lake in the distance, gray and vast and entirely indifferent to the specific human difficulties of the 34th floor of the Meridian Tower. In the elevator, Derek looked at Ryan. "You've done investor presentations before?" he said. "A few," Ryan said. "How were they?" Ryan thought about it. "One was good, one was terrible, one I've tried to forget." Derek considered this. "Solid average." "That's one way to look at it," Ryan said. The elevator opened at the lobby. They walked out into the Monday afternoon where the city was doing what it always did, moving forward on its own schedule, not waiting for anyone to be ready. He didn't sleep well. This was not unusual. Ryan hadn't slept well consistently in 3 years, had developed a functional relationship with 5 or 6 hours that was neither satisfying nor debilitating, just the terms he'd negotiated with his own body after everything happened. But Monday night was a particular kind of bad sleep, the kind driven not by grief or exhaustion, but by the specific low-grade electricity of anticipating something that mattered. He lay in the dark and thought about the presentation. Not the content. He knew the content, had spent the weekend building it piece by piece until he understood it the way you understand something you've constructed with your own hands. He thought about the room, the investors sitting on one side of the table, Vanessa to his left, the drawings projected on the screen behind him. The moment when the investor's engineering reviewer, whoever they'd sent, whatever their background, started asking questions. He thought about the last time he'd stood in a room like that. Atrion, 6 years ago, a hospital complex in the suburbs. He'd been 30, sharp, certain. He'd known the numbers in his sleep. He remembered the reviewer asking him about the foundation transfer system and the way he'd been able to answer before the question finished, not from arrogance but from genuine intimacy with the design. He hadn't felt that way about work in a long time. He felt something close to it now, not identical. He was 35, not 30, and the distance between those numbers wasn't just time, but something in the same territory. The particular alertness of a problem you've solved and understood and can now explain. At 6, he got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the drawing package for 20 minutes, not looking at it so much as sitting with it, the way athletes sit with what they're about to do. At 7, he woke Maisie. She wanted to wear her purple jacket, which was in the wash. This produced a negotiation that Ryan was not, at 6:50 in the morning with a presentation in 3 hours, ideally positioned for. They settled on the blue one, which she accepted with the energy of someone granting a significant concession. "Why are you wearing that?" she said, looking at his shirt. He was wearing the only dress shirt he still owned that fit correctly. A dark blue button-down he'd found at the back of the closet, slightly wrinkled despite his efforts with the iron. He'd paired it with dark pants and the jacket that he'd bought for a conference 4 years ago and hadn't worn since. He looked, he was aware, like a person attempting professional appearance from an incomplete wardrobe. He looked like what he was. "I have a meeting today," he said. "A fancy one?" "A somewhat fancy one." She looked at him with the focused assessment of a child evaluating a situation whose full context she's been given insufficient information about. "You look nice," she said, which he suspected was diplomatic rather than accurate. "Thank you," he said. "Blue jacket. Let's go." The 34th floor at 8 in the morning was operating at a frequency Ryan hadn't felt before. Not the pressure of the previous week, which had been the pressure of crisis, but something more focused. The kind of energy in a room full of people who have come through something difficult and are now on the other side of it, close enough to the end to feel it, but not so close that they'd stopped paying attention. Priya had set up a workstation for Ryan in the secondary conference room, which was where he'd be staging before the presentation. The drawing package was already there, printed and bound, 3 copies. The projector was running. Someone had left a coffee on the table, which he appreciated without knowing who to thank. Derek came in at 8:20. He looked like a man who had also not slept particularly well, but in the way that was productive, the slightly compressed, over-focused quality of someone who had spent the night refining things. "The investors confirmed 4 people coming," Derek said. "Marcus Webb, the investor group's managing partner." He stopped. "Different Webb, different family." "Noted," Ryan said. "Their structural reviewer is a woman named Patricia Lund. She's licensed in 4 states, spent 10 years at a firm in New York before moving to the review side. Her specialty," Derek checked his phone, "foundation systems and high-rise lateral load design." Ryan looked at him. "How do you know her specialty?" "I looked her up last night." "At what time last night?" Derek's expression suggested the answer was not a respectable hour. "The point is she's going to ask hard questions, good questions. She'll probably push on the transfer level corrections because that's where the revision is most significant." "Good," Ryan said. Derek looked at him. "Good?" "The corrections are right," Ryan said. "If she pushes on them, we go deeper into the engineering. That's fine with me." Derek exhaled. "Yeah, okay." He sat down across the table. "You've done this before." "I've done the work before," Ryan said. "The presenting is a different thing, but if the work is right, the presenting follows. And if it doesn't, then you answer the next question." Vanessa arrived at 8:45. She came into the secondary conference room without knocking. It was her building. And stopped when she saw Ryan and Derek already there, the drawings organized, the projector showing the opening slide of the presentation. Something moved across her face that she contained quickly. She was dressed differently than Ryan had seen her. Not formally different. She'd been formal every time he'd seen her, but with a particular deliberateness to it. Dark blazer, clean lines, nothing that would distract from whatever she was saying. The clothes of someone who understood that appearance was communication and had made a specific choice about what to communicate. "How are we sitting?" she said. "Ready," Derek said. She looked at Ryan. "How are you sitting?" "Fine," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I have structural staff who can present the engineering section. If you want to step back—" "I don't want to step back," Ryan said. "All right." She looked at the projected slide. It showed the Pinnacle's tower massing diagram, the building's silhouette against a stylized Chicago skyline. Her skyline. "I'm going to say something to the investors at the start of the presentation, before the design package, about what happened last week." Ryan looked at her. "Not all of it," she said. "Not Webb, not the full investigation. That's with counsel, and it's not appropriate for an investor meeting. But the fact that a structural discrepancy was identified in the drawing set, that it was corrected over the weekend, and that the correction was made by—" She stopped. She seemed to be selecting words with care. "By a structural engineer I've brought onto the project team." "You don't have to characterize it that way," Ryan said. "It's accurate. I was a janitor here 6 days ago." "You were a structural engineer who was working in facilities," Vanessa said. "That's what I'm going to say because that's what's true. And I'm going to say it because the investors have a right to understand the integrity of the process that produced this package." She paused. "And because you deserve to walk into that room as what you are." The secondary conference room was quiet. Derek appeared to be finding the wall very interesting. Ryan looked at Vanessa. She looked back at him with the directness he'd come to expect from her, the quality of someone who had decided at some point in her life that looking away from difficult things was a luxury she wasn't going to afford herself. "Okay," he said. The investors arrived at 9:58. 4 of them, as Derek had noted, Marcus Webb, 2 associates whose names Ryan immediately lost, and Patricia Lund, who was a compact woman in her late 40s with close-cut gray hair and the kind of hands that belonged to someone who'd spent time on construction sites. She shook Ryan's hand when Vanessa introduced the room, made brief, direct eye contact, and sat down. Ryan noted that she opened a notebook and uncapped a pen before the presentation started. An old habit, the kind that meant she preferred her own notes to any materials provided. He respected that. Vanessa ran the first section: firm credentials, project history, the Pinnacle's design philosophy, and relationship to the surrounding urban context. She was good at it. Ryan had watched her operate under pressure for a week, and this was a different register. Polished without being glossy, confident without performing confidence. She knew when to slow down on a slide and when to move through it, knew when a question was an invitation and when it was a test. She'd done this many times. At the handoff to structural, she said what she'd said she would say. "Before we move into the engineering package, I want to be transparent about something. During our final internal review last week, a structural discrepancy was identified in the load distribution documentation for the transfer level. The error was caught by Ryan Calloway, a structural engineer I've brought onto the project team, who identified it before the drawing set went anywhere outside this firm." She paused. "The revised package you're looking at today reflects corrections made and verified over this past weekend. Ryan will walk you through the structural section and can speak directly to the revisions." Marcus Webb, the investor, leaned forward slightly. "What was the nature of the discrepancy?" "Ryan," Vanessa said. Ryan stood. He'd thought about this moment at 6 a.m, sitting at his kitchen table. He'd thought about what it would feel like to be back in front of a room, to have people looking at him as the person with the answers. He'd expected it to feel strange. He'd expected some lag between who he'd been and who he was standing up to be now. It didn't feel strange. It felt like slipping into a language he'd always spoken but hadn't had reason to use. "The error was in the tributary load model for the secondary transfer beams at level 14, he said. "The load calculations were internally coherent. They were performed correctly, but they were built against a preliminary geotechnical baseline, rather than the final bearing capacity report. The discrepancy between the two baselines was significant enough to result in undersized beam sections under real dynamic load conditions. He let that settle for a beat. I'll show you exactly where it was, how we corrected it, and what the verification analysis shows. He clicked to the first structural slide. Patricia Lund's pen was already moving. She asked 7 questions over the course of 35 minutes. They were good questions, precise, technically demanding, focused on exactly the areas where the revision was most significant. The transfer beam connection detail, the load redistribution path under seismic conditions, the relationship between the corrected transfer level and the foundation system 3 stories below. Ryan answered every one of them, not fluently. There were 2 moments where he paused and worked through the answer in real time rather than producing it immediately. And he didn't try to hide that, just said, "Let me walk through the calculation," and walked through it. Lund watched him do it both times with an expression that gave nothing away until the end of the second one, when she wrote something in her notebook and said, "That's the correct approach." Most people would have just cited the summary figure. "The summary figure loses the load path logic," Ryan said. "Yes, it does," she said. "That's my point." She asked 2 more questions after that. He answered them. At 11:40, Marcus Webb looked at his 2 associates and then at Vanessa. "We'd like a few minutes," he said. Vanessa nodded. She and Ryan and Derek stepped out of the main conference room into the secondary one and stood there. Derek sat down. Vanessa stood at the window. Ryan stood near the door. Nobody said anything for a moment. "Lund liked it," Derek said finally. "She was professional," Vanessa said. "That's different from—" "She liked it," Derek said. "When she said that thing about the load path logic, that wasn't a neutral observation. That was—" He looked at Ryan. "She was telling the room she was satisfied," in Patricia Lund language. Ryan leaned against the door frame. His jacket felt slightly wrong across the shoulders. He hadn't worn it in 4 years, and he resisted the urge to adjust it. "You've seen her review before?" Ryan said. "Once," Derek said. "Different project, different firm. I was a junior engineer. She rejected the foundation documentation in the first 20 minutes. Sent everyone home." He paused. She did not say anything nice about load path logic. Vanessa turned from the window. She looked at Ryan with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not the CEO evaluating, not the person managing, just someone looking at another person and seeing something specific there. "When you were explaining the seismic scenario," she said. The third question she asked. "You weren't reciting. You were thinking about the building." Ryan looked at her. "I know what it looks like when someone knows information versus when someone understands it," she said. "You understand it." "I spent 3 days with it," he said. "You spent 3 days with it because you cared about getting it right," she said. "Not because I asked you to." She paused. "There's a difference." He didn't argue with that because it was true, and arguing with true things was a waste of time he didn't have much tolerance for. The door to the main conference room opened. Priya appeared. "They'd like you back in," she said. Marcus Webb spoke for the investors. He had the practiced manner of someone who made significant decisions regularly and had learned that the way you delivered them mattered as much as what was in them. "We have some questions about the timeline for the corrected documentation to be incorporated into the full drawing set," he said. "And we'd want an independent structural peer review of the revised transfer level design before construction documents." "Both of those are reasonable," Vanessa said immediately. "We can turn the documentation within 10 days, and we'll engage an independent reviewer. I'd suggest we agree on the firm jointly." Webb nodded. He looked at his associates. The exchange was brief. "Subject to those conditions," he said, "we're prepared to move forward with the contract." The room processed this. Vanessa's face did not change dramatically, which Ryan suspected was an act of significant discipline. Derek, next to him, exhaled very quietly through his nose. Patricia Lund was writing something in her notebook. She finished writing it, capped her pen, and looked up. "Mr. Calloway," she said. Ryan looked at her. "Are you taking a position with the firm?" she said. It was not a casual question. It had the weight of something that mattered to her professionally, and he understood why. She would be recommending this project to her client. She was asking, in the polite language of peer review, whether the person who'd fixed the problem would still be attached to it. "We're discussing that," Vanessa said. Lund looked at Vanessa, then back at Ryan. She waited. "Yes," Ryan said. "I expect so." Something shifted in the room at that. Not dramatically, just the small adjustment of people recalibrating around a new piece of information. Lund wrote something else in her notebook. Webb was already reaching across the table for the drawing package. "Then I think we have what we need," he said. The investors left at 12:20. Priya walked them to the elevator, and when the elevator doors closed, the 34th floor let out a collective breath that it had apparently been holding since 9:58. Ryan was still in the main conference room, gathering the drawing sets, when Vanessa came back in. Derek had gone to the studio floor, where Ryan could already hear the change in the ambient noise. Not louder, just lighter, the sound of people who'd been carrying something and had put it down. Vanessa closed the conference room door. She stood near it, which gave Ryan the impression that she wasn't staying, that she'd come in to say something specific and then intended to go back to the work that would be waiting for her. "I meant what I said earlier," she said, "about a position." Ryan set down the drawing tube. "I know. I'd want you on the pinnacle through construction documentation. After that," she stopped. She seemed to be working through the architecture of what she was proposing in real time, which was unusual for her. He'd noticed that she was most fluent when she was certain, and that when she was uncertain she slowed down in a way that was slightly more visible than she'd probably prefer. "After that, I think there's a larger conversation about what you'd want the role to be. Whether you'd want it to be structural review, project engineering, something else." "With what hours?" he said. "Flexible," she said. "That's not—" She made a small gesture. "That's not negotiable on my end. Maisie is 7. She needs her father at 3:15. That's not something I'm going to treat as a variable." Ryan looked at her for a moment. "You looked her up," he said. "I looked up what school she attends," Vanessa said, "so I could understand the geography of what I was asking you for. That's it." A pause. I want to be clear that I'm not trying to manage your personal situation. I'm trying to make sure I'm not creating a role that forces you to choose between it and her." He stood with that for a moment. The conference room was quiet, the city visible through the window behind her. "My wife would have had an opinion about this building," he said. It came out differently than when he'd said it on the phone Saturday, less guarded, like something he was actually offering rather than just sharing. She had an opinion about every building. She used to say that structural engineers build things that work and architects build things that matter, and the best buildings are the ones where someone made those two things the same. Vanessa was quiet. "She would have liked the pinnacle," he said, "the tower core logic, the way the lateral system relates to the massing. Someone thought about the whole thing, not just the pieces." "Derek spent 8 months on the concept design," Vanessa said. "I don't think he slept much." "It shows, in a good way." She looked at him steadily. "Is that a yes?" He looked at the drawing tube in his hands. He thought about the document on his laptop that he'd opened Friday night and closed. He thought about standing in front of Patricia Lund and answering 7 questions about a building he'd spent 3 days learning and understanding and caring about. He thought about Maisie at the engineering exhibit, explaining that the arch was strongest because the weight goes sideways instead of down. "You told me," she'd said, like a year ago. I remembered. "It's a yes," he said. Vanessa nodded. She held his gaze for a moment, the clean, direct way she had of looking at things she'd decided mattered. And then she opened the conference room door. "I'll have Priya set up the contract discussion for Thursday," she said, "after 3:15. She walked out. He could hear her on the floor, moving toward her office, someone calling her name with a question, her voice shifting back into the register of a CEO, with a firm to run, and a contract to execute, and 10 days of documentation to coordinate. He stood in the conference room alone for a moment. He looked at the Chicago skyline through the window, the grid of it, the lake beyond, the pinnacle site somewhere in the near north, an empty lot right now where someday a building would stand that would work correctly because someone had looked at a blueprint on a Monday morning and hadn't looked away. He picked up the drawing tube. He turned off the projector. He walked out onto the floor to find Derek, because there was still work to do, and the work, right now, was where he wanted to be. The contract arrived Thursday morning, 2 days after the investor walkthrough, delivered to Vanessa's desk by her general counsel in a folder that was, given everything it represented, surprisingly thin. She read it twice, made 3 edits, one to the credit language in the project documentation section, one to the intellectual property clause, one to the title designation, which she changed from structural consultant to senior structural engineer project lead. Her counsel looked at the change and looked at her and didn't say anything, because he'd worked with her long enough to understand which decisions she'd already finished making. She signed it. She put it back in the folder. She told Priya to have it ready for 3:45, which was when Ryan had said he could come by after Maisie's pickup. Then she went back to work because there was a firm to run and 10 days of revised documentation to coordinate and a contract to execute and about 47 other things that required her attention. She was good at going back to work. It was possibly the thing she was best at. What she was less good at, and she knew this, had known it for years in the way you know things about yourself that you've chosen not to spend much time on, was the space between finishing something and starting the next thing. That small gap where you were supposed to feel whatever you'd earned the right to feel. She usually filled it immediately. She didn't trust it. She filled it today with the Pinnacle documentation schedule and 2 calls with the independent peer reviewer they'd selected, a firm in Milwaukee. Patricia Lund had recommended them, which carried more weight than a standard referral, and a meeting with Derek about the revised drawing set timeline. She filled every available minute until Priya knocked on the open door at 3:40 and said Ryan was in the secondary conference room. She picked up the folder and went to him. He was standing when she came in, not sitting, which she had started to understand was a characteristic thing. Ryan Calloway sat when he was working, when he was in the problem. When he was waiting for something that mattered, he stood. Maisie was with him. This was unexpected. Vanessa stopped in the doorway for half a second, not long enough to be visible, she hoped, and recalibrated. The girl was small, 7 years old, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail that had mostly escaped its elastic over the course of the day. She was wearing a blue jacket and holding a library book against her chest with both arms, looking around the conference room with the specific assessment of a child evaluating a new space. "She wanted to see where I was going," Ryan said. He said it in the tone of someone offering an explanation that was also mildly an apology. "Of course," Vanessa said. She looked at Maisie. "Hi, I'm Vanessa." Maisie looked at her with the directness that children had before they learned to soften it. "My dad works here now?" "He's going to," Vanessa said. "He used to work here before," Maisie said. "He mopped." "I know," Vanessa said. "He also fixed something important." Maisie considered this with the expression of someone filing it away for later evaluation. "Can I sit?" she said, pointing at one of the conference room chairs. "Yes," Vanessa said. Maisie sat in the chair, opened her library book, and began reading with the focused efficiency of a person who had determined that the adults needed to talk and had decided to be somewhere else mentally while her body remained in the room. Vanessa found this either admirable or slightly alarming and wasn't sure which. She set the folder on the table in front of Ryan. "The title is Senior Structural Engineer Project Lead," she said. "I changed it from the original draft. You're the lead structural voice on the Pinnacle through construction documents and the peer review process. After that, we'll talk about what the permanent role looks like." Ryan opened the folder. He read it the way he read everything, not quickly, actually reading. She waited. She was a person who was not good at waiting, but had decided to be good at it in this specific instance. He turned 2 pages. He stopped on something. He read it again. "The salary," he said, "is appropriate for a senior structural engineer with your background and licensure," she said. "You'll need to renew your PE license. I assume it's lapsed, not surrendered?" "Lapsed," he said. "I kept paying the renewal fees. I don't know why I kept doing that." He said this last part quietly, more to himself than her. She thought she might know why, but she didn't say it. He read the rest of the contract. At the bottom of the last page, there was a clause she'd added herself, after her counsel had finished the draft. Not standard language, not boilerplate, something she'd written in longhand and asked them to include verbatim. Ryan read it. He went still. "Read it out loud," he said. Just to make sure he was reading it correctly, his tone suggested. Vanessa looked at the clause. Contribution credit. Ryan Calloway is credited as the identifying engineer for the structural discrepancy correction of November 2024 in the Lakeshore Pinnacle project documentation. This credit shall appear in all project records, the final construction document set, and any firm communications regarding the project's structural design integrity. The conference room was quiet except for the faint sound of Maisie turning a page. "You didn't have to put that in," Ryan said. "No," Vanessa said. "I didn't have to." He looked at her. She looked back. The thing between them in that moment was not complicated exactly, but it had layers. The whole week of it, the parking garage, and the phone calls, and the drawings spread across a kitchen table, and a 7-question cross-examination from Tricia Lund, and everything that had led from one moment of bad judgment to this folder on this table in this room. "Pen?" he said. She had one in her jacket pocket. She handed it to him. He signed the contract on the last page, then went back and initialed the clause. He closed the folder and handed it back. "Daddy," Maisie said, without looking up from her book. "Are you done?" "Yeah, Bug," he said. "I'm done." "Can we get food? I'm hungry." "We can get food." She closed the book, climbed off the chair, and stood beside him. She looked up at Vanessa with the directness she'd shown before. "Are you his boss?" she said. "I am," Vanessa said. Maisie processed this. "Are you a good boss?" The question landed in the conference room and stayed there. Vanessa looked at the 7-year-old who was asking it without any awareness that it was a question most adults wouldn't ask, and who therefore asked it with the clarity of someone who genuinely wanted to know. "I'm working on it," Vanessa said. Maisie seemed to find this acceptable. She turned to Ryan. "Can we have Thai food?" "Sure," he said. He picked up his jacket from the back of a chair. He looked at Vanessa. "Monday?" he said, meaning, when do I start? "Monday," she said. 8 o'clock, Priya will have your workstation set up." He nodded. He put his hand on Maisie's shoulder, light and easy, the unconscious gesture of a parent whose body has memorized a child nearby, and walked to the conference room door. He held it open for Maisie, who went through it and was already walking toward the elevator. In the doorway, Ryan stopped. He turned back. "Vanessa." She looked at him. "Thank you," he said, "for the clause." She didn't say you earned it or you deserved it or any of the things that were true, but would have felt, in this particular moment, slightly off the weight of what he was actually saying. He wasn't thanking her for the credit. He was thanking her for the acknowledgement, for the difference between being seen and not being seen, which was, she was beginning to understand, something he'd had a complicated relationship with for a long time. "Monday," she said. He left. She stood in the empty conference room and looked at the folder in her hands. Outside, through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see the floor. Derek at his cluster, Priya at her station, the junior staff moving between workstations with drawings and laptops, the whole functional organism of the firm running the way it ran. She heard the elevator ding. She heard it close. She went back to work. Harrison Webb retained a lawyer. This was not a surprise. The outside counsel's investigation, which had been running quietly for 2 weeks alongside the Pinnacle documentation process, produced a report in early December that was 53 pages long and specific in a way that left very little room for alternative interpretations. The KIAD file metadata, the building access logs, email correspondence recovered from the firm's server archive that documented Webb's communication with at least one board member in the months before the Pinnacle process began, communications that were not strictly improper but that, read against everything else, told a coherent story about a man who had decided his interest lay in the firm's failure rather than its success. Webb's lawyer argued that the CAD revision could have been an honest mistake, that the access logs were circumstantial, that the email correspondence was professional advocacy taken out of context. These were not entirely unreasonable arguments on their own. Against 53 pages, they didn't hold. The board convened in mid-December. Vanessa presented the report, answered questions for 2 hours, and then stepped out while they deliberated. She stood in the hallway outside the boardroom and looked at a framed rendering of the firm's second-ever commission. A community center in Evanston, 1994, 6 years before she joined the firm, and thought about how many decisions had been made inside that boardroom in the time since. How many of them had been made by people who were trying to protect something real, and how many by people who were trying to protect something that was really about them. The board voted 7-1 to pursue formal legal action. Webb settled 2 months later, the terms private, the outcome effectively final. She heard about it from her counsel on a Tuesday morning. She thanked him, hung up, and went to her next meeting. The Pinnacle documentation was completed on schedule. The independent peer review from the Milwaukee firm took 12 days, which was faster than anyone had anticipated, and the report came back clean on the revised structural package with 2 minor comment items that Derek addressed in an afternoon. Patricia Lund received a copy of the peer review on behalf of the investor group and responded with a single email. Satisfied. Good work on the corrections. Coming from Lund, Derek said, this was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. Ryan was in the office every day from 8 to 3, and sometimes from 8 to 4 if Maisie had after-school activities and Mrs. Okafor was covering pickup. He worked at the cluster Derek had set up for him, which was near the window on the east side, close enough to the structural team to be in the conversation, but with enough separation that he had his own orbit. He was not, Vanessa observed, the kind of person who needed to be in the center of things. He was the kind of person who needed to be where the work was. He was also, it turned out, the kind of person other engineers came to with questions. Not officially. He wasn't their supervisor, and nobody had announced that he was available for that. But gradually, in the way that credibility accumulates, people started appearing at his workstation with problems. A junior engineer with a connection detail she wasn't sure about. Derek with a lateral load question on a different project, smaller than the Pinnacle, but with its own complications. A mid-level associate asking for a second pair of eyes on a foundation analysis. Ryan answered their questions. He was direct, not particularly warm, occasionally blunt in ways that made people recalibrate and then usually come back because they'd realized he was right. He wasn't easy to work with, exactly. He had standards, and the standards were not flexible. But he was fair in the way that mattered, the way that meant his assessment of your work was about your work and not about anything else. Vanessa watched this happen over the course of December without doing anything about it, because doing something about it would have been unnecessary. She was learning, slowly, to let things find their own level. 7. She asked him to lunch in the second week of December. Not a working lunch, she had enough of those, but the other kind. The kind that had no agenda she could have written on a calendar invite. She chose a Thai place 3 blocks from the office because it was the first restaurant that came to mind, and then realized, when she got there, that she'd chosen it because Maisie had asked for Thai food on contract day, and she'd filed that away without realizing it. She was doing that more, filing things away, noticing them later. It was not something she'd made a habit of before. They sat across from each other in a booth near the window. It was a Tuesday, 12:30. The lunch rush mostly cleared. Ryan ordered without looking at the menu for very long, the habit of someone who'd eaten at enough places to have a general approach. She did the same. "How's the PE renewal going?" she said. "Applied last week," he said. "Continuing ed modules are mostly online. I'll be done by end of January." "Good." "I know," he said. There was something very slightly dry in that, not quite humor, but adjacent to it. The quality she'd noticed in him when he was comfortable enough to let something through. They talked about the peer review, about the construction document timeline, about a complicated moment 2 days prior when 2 of the junior engineers had disagreed about a detailing approach, and Ryan had spent 40 minutes working through it with them at the whiteboard, not resolving it by authority, but by actually going through the engineering step by step until the right answer became visible to everyone in the room. "Kylie told me about the whiteboard session," Vanessa said. "It was a straightforward problem once you laid it out. She said you didn't just tell them the answer." He looked at her. "If I just tell them the answer, the next time they have the same problem, they need me again. That's not useful to anyone. No, she said. It's not. She ate for a moment. The restaurant had a quality she liked. Not too quiet, not too loud. The specific ambient noise of a place that was good at what it did and didn't need to announce it. I need to tell you something, she said, about what I've been thinking about with the firm. He waited. I want to formalize the structural practice, she said. Not a separate entity, not an acquisition. A dedicated structural division inside the firm. We've been contracting structural engineering out for most of our larger projects, or relying on the engineering staff we have in a support capacity. I want to build it properly. Internal capacity integrated with design from the start. She paused. The Pinnacle showed me what that looks like when it works. When the structural logic is part of the design conversation from day one, instead of something that gets bolted on at the back end. Ryan was looking at her steadily. I'd want you to build it, she said. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the table. He looked at the window. It was overcast outside, December in Chicago doing what December in Chicago did. That's a significant thing, he said. I know. It's not a 6-month project, building a structural division from scratch, hiring, standards, workflow integration, the relationship with the design team. I know what it is, she said. I've thought about it. He looked at her. Why me? You could hire someone with an established practice, someone who has a team already, a track record in the last 3 years instead of... He stopped. Instead of a gap, she said. Yes. Because the gap isn't the relevant thing, she said. The relevant thing is what you did with a blueprint on the floor and a week and a weekend and a room full of investors. She paused. And because the person I hire to build something tells me what kind of thing I'm building, I want to build something that cares about whether the building works, not as an afterthought, as the foundation. The word hung there for a moment between them. Foundation. She hadn't chosen it deliberately, but it was right. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might be about to say no, and she was already thinking through what that would mean and whether she'd argue with it. I'd need the hours to stay flexible, he said. Through this year at least. Maisie's 8 in February. This is a year I want to be present for. Yes, Vanessa said. And I'd want to hire slowly, one person at a time, not a batch. I want to know who I'm building with. Agreed. And the division has to have a direct line to the design process, he said, not a review function at the back end. If the structural lead isn't in the room when the design concept is set, you're going to have the same problem you had with the Pinnacle, different version. That's exactly what I want to change, Vanessa said. He looked at her for a moment. I want to think about it for a few days, he said. Take the time, she said. He nodded. He looked out the window again. She's going to want to see the building, he said. When it's built. She'll want to go look at it. Then we'll take her, Vanessa said, and then heard herself say it. The we of it, easy and unconsidered, the word that arrived before she could choose a different one. Ryan heard it too. He looked at her briefly and then looked back at the window, and neither of them addressed it because it didn't need to be addressed. It was just a word, just the shape of something that didn't have a name yet and wasn't required to. He said yes on Friday. In the hallway outside the break room, 7 minutes before a project meeting, with a cup of coffee in his hand and no particular ceremony. Just, I've thought about it. Yes. She said good and walked into the meeting, and he went back to his workstation, and that was how they did things. January came. The PE renewal was complete by the 3rd week. Ryan's name went back onto the professional engineering registry. Ryan Thomas Calloway, PE, Illinois license number that hadn't changed in the 10 years since he'd first earned it. And Priya printed the renewal certificate and taped it to his workstation without being asked and without making anything of it, because she had excellent judgment about which moments needed ceremony and which ones just needed acknowledgement. Ryan looked at the certificate for a long moment. He straightened it against the partition. He went back to work. The Lakeshore Pinnacle groundbreaking was in March. It was a cold day, the kind Chicago produced in early spring when winter hadn't quite given up, a gray sky with the particular flat quality that came before rain that hadn't arrived yet. The site was a cleared lot in the near north, the ground still winter hard, a temporary platform set up at the edge of the site for the ceremony. representatives from the investor group, the city permitting office, the general contractor, a large man named Erickson who had a contractor's skepticism of architects and had spent 3 site meetings learning to have a different kind of relationship with Ryan specifically, whom he referred to by the end of the 3rd meeting as the guy who knows what he's talking about. Maisie was there. Ryan had asked Vanessa 2 weeks before the groundbreaking whether it would be appropriate to bring her. Vanessa had said yes without hesitation and then called the events coordinator and made sure there would be something for a child to do while adults made speeches. There was a hard hat in Maisie's size, orange because that was the only color left, and she wore it over her purple jacket, which was clean and available, and stood beside her father on the platform with the focused seriousness of someone attending an event whose full significance she was working to understand. Vanessa spoke first. She talked about the project, the firm, the partnership with the investor group. She talked about the design, about what the building was trying to do, architecturally, in relationship to the lake and the skyline and the neighborhood around it. She was good at this, at finding the language that made a building feel like something a person might care about rather than just a structure going up. Then she stopped in the middle of a paragraph. She stopped and she looked at the site, the cleared ground, the winter sky, the drawn perimeter of a thing that didn't exist yet but would. And she said something that wasn't in the prepared remarks. "I want to say something that's not part of the standard event language," she said. "A few months ago, I made a decision about a person that was fast and certain and completely wrong. I looked at someone based on what he was wearing and what job title was attached to his name, and I concluded that I knew everything I needed to know about his value. I didn't. I was arrogant, and I was wrong, and the cost of that could have been everything we're standing here to celebrate today." She paused. "The person who caught the error that would have ended this project is standing on this platform. His name is Ryan Calloway, and he is the senior structural engineer and division lead for Whitaker and Associates, and this building will stand correctly because of his work." She looked at Ryan. "I wanted to say that here, on the ground where the building is going to be, so that the record is clear about how we got here." The people on the platform applauded. Ryan looked at Vanessa with an expression she'd come to recognize, the one that wasn't quite composed, that let something through the containment, not dramatically, but enough to see. Maisie tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, people are clapping for you." "Yeah," he said. "You should do something," she said, "like wave or something." He looked at her. He looked at the people still clapping. He raised one hand briefly, the gesture of a man who found this particular kind of visibility uncomfortable but was doing it anyway because his 7-year-old daughter had told him to. The clapping continued for a moment and then moved on, the way these moments do, into the next part of the ceremony. Maisie appeared to consider his wave adequate. She went back to examining her hard hat. Vanessa came to stand beside him while Erickson was speaking, not close enough to be remarkable, just near. "You didn't have to say that," he said quietly, under the contractor's remarks. "I know," she said. "You did it anyway." "You did the same thing," she said. "You came back to a building that had fired you and fixed a problem you didn't cause because the building mattered more than the insult. I thought the least I could do was tell the truth about it in public." He looked at the cleared site, the gray sky, the perimeter of the future building marked in stakes and string, the invisible shape of something waiting to become real. "She's going to tell everyone at school about the hard hat," he said. "I would too," Vanessa said. Later, months later, when the building steel was rising and Maisie was 8, and Ryan had hired the first 2 members of the structural division, and the world had moved far enough from that November morning that it was possible to see it clearly, Vanessa would think about what the week had actually cost and what it had actually given. It had cost her pride, which was not nothing. She was a person who had built an identity around being right, around the particular competence of knowing what to do and doing it quickly and well. Being wrong in public, in front of her entire staff, about a person, not a design decision, not a timeline, a person, was the kind of error she would have told you before it happened that she didn't make. She made it. She had to sit with that. But sitting with it had also given her something she didn't have a clean word for, a kind of recalibration, She had spent 10 years running a firm by being certain, and certainty had served her well. And certainty had also, on one specific morning, caused her to fire the one person in her building who could see what no one else could see. Both of those things were true simultaneously. She had to hold both of them. She started asking more questions. Not in the way of someone who'd lost confidence. She hadn't, not exactly. But in the way of someone who'd learned that her conclusions, however rapidly and surely arrived at, were not the only reliable data in the room. She started asking the junior engineers what they were seeing before she told them what she thought. She started treating the spaces between her certainties as places where something useful might be found. It was not a comfortable adjustment. She was not fundamentally a person who found uncertainty comfortable. But she was learning, a person who could choose to stay in the discomfort long enough to learn from it rather than moving through it as quickly as possible. This was the thing that week gave her that she hadn't expected. Not humility exactly, which is a word that can become its own kind of performance, but something more functional. The willingness to be wrong about a person and let that be the beginning of something rather than the end. Ryan thought about it differently. He thought about it the way you think about a thing that happened to you when you weren't looking for it, that arrived without announcement and changed the shape of the next period of your life. He hadn't gone to work that November morning expecting anything to change. He'd gone to work expecting to mop a floor and go home and make pasta and help with reading homework. The ambition had been contained, which had been okay, which had felt like the reasonable scale of things for where he was. And then a blueprint had fallen off a table. He'd thought about that a lot, in the months after, the specific randomness of it, the way large outcomes depended, more than anyone liked to admit, on small accidents. A roll of paper that hadn't quite stayed on the table, a morning when the mop cart happened to be in that corner of the room. He wasn't someone who read significance into coincidences. He was an engineer. He understood load paths. He understood that a system was the product of its components, not of fate. But he also understood that a system could be loaded and ready to fail or ready to hold, and that the small event, the roll of paper, the moment of recognition, was just the test. The capacity had to already be there. He'd kept his PE license current for 3 years without knowing why. He'd kept going to the grocery store and making pancakes and sitting in the park explaining arch mechanics to a 7-year-old. He'd opened a laptop document at midnight and closed it again, not because he'd given up, but because he wasn't quite ready and he'd known the difference. The capacity had been there. The morning had tested it. What he'd learned, or relearned more accurately, since he'd known it once before and had let it get buried under 3 years of other concerns, was that the work mattered in a specific way that was hard to substitute. Not work in the abstract, not the idea of contribution or professional identity, but this specific thing. Looking at a structural drawing and understanding what it was trying to do, being in conversation with the geometry of a building, seeing how the load wanted to move and finding the path that let it move cleanly. That mattered to him at a level that preceded language, the same level at which other people were moved by music or by the specific quality of light at a certain time of day. He had tried to live without that for 3 years. He had been surviving it, not living it. The distinction had become clear the moment he'd crouched down next to a blueprint on a Monday morning and felt his brain go quiet and focused in the way it only went when it was doing the thing it was built to do. He was not a person who believed that things happened for reasons in any organized sense. He'd lost his wife at 32. He knew, with a certainty that no architecture of belief could touch, that the universe did not arrange events toward lessons. Things happened. You were in them. You found out what you were made of. What he was made of, it had turned out, included a structural engineer who could read a load path error in a cold scan of a drawing he'd never seen before. He was glad that was still in there. He was glad he found out. There was an evening in April when Ryan stayed late. Not unusually late, 6:30, Maisie at Mrs. Okafor's with permission. But the floor had emptied out by then, the lights on their evening dimmer, the south windows full of the skyline going orange and fading. He was at his workstation, finalizing a connection detail on the Pinnacle structural package, when he heard Vanessa's office door open. She came out in her jacket, keys in her hand, the posture of someone who had finally agreed to leave for the day. She saw him at his workstation and stopped. "You're still here," she said. "Almost done." She walked over. She stood at the edge of his workstation and looked at the drawing on his screen. The connection detail, the steel members coming together at a joint, the precision of it, the way the forces wanted to pass through cleanly. "What is that?" she said. "Level 14 transfer joint," he said. "The beam-to-column moment connection." The peer review flagged a preferred detailing method that was different from what we had. I've been working through the comparison. And? "The peer review is right," he said. "Their approach is cleaner under combined loading. I'm revising to match." He paused. "I should have caught it the first time." "You did catch it," she said. "That's what revising means." He looked at her for a moment. There was something about the way she said it, not cheerfully, not as encouragement, just as a statement of the engineering reality, that was more useful than almost anything someone could have said with more warmth. "Your wife," Vanessa said, not as a question, just saying it, the way you say a thing when you want to give it the space it deserves rather than approaching it sideways. "Clara," he said, "was she good at what she did?" He looked at the drawing. "She was one of those people who made it look like something other than work," he said. She'd walk into a space and you could see her reading it, not analyzing, just reading, like it was telling her things. She had an instinct for how people needed to be in spaces, what made them feel held versus exposed. He paused. "She would have redesigned our apartment 3 times by now, and it would have been right all 3 times. Vanessa looked at the drawing on his screen. "Tell me what she would have said about the pinnacle. Really?" He considered it. She would have said the lobby's too transactional, that whoever designed the entrance was thinking about how it looks from outside and not about the 10 seconds when you walk in and your body decides whether it's a place you want to be. He paused. She would have been right. "The lobby design hasn't been finalized," Vanessa said. He looked at her. "It's been tabled," she said. "We've had other things to deal with. If someone wanted to make an argument for revisiting the interior design approach..." She stopped. She held his gaze. "What was her full name?" "Clara Reyes Calloway," he said. Vanessa nodded, as if she was committing something to memory. "Do you have any of her design work? Notes, sketches, anything?" He was quiet for a moment. "Some," he said. "Not much, but some." "Maisie knows?" "She knows her mother was a designer," he said. "She knows her mother thought hard about spaces." He paused. "She already thinks hard about spaces. She's been doing it since she was 4 and she doesn't know where it came from." Vanessa looked at the south windows. The sky had gone fully dark now, the city below lit and running, the lake invisible past the edge of it. "I'd like to see her work," Vanessa said. "If you're willing, the lobby hasn't been finalized." He looked at the windows. He thought about a laptop document opened at midnight. He thought about a folder he hadn't been able to bring himself to put in storage but hadn't been able to look at, a folder full of Clara's design notebooks, and the photographs she'd taken of spaces she was studying and the annotated floor plans she'd made when she was working through something. He thought about opening that folder and looking at it not as an act of grief management, but as an act of use, of honoring the intelligence in it by putting it to work. "I'll bring them," he said. She nodded. She said goodnight and walked to the elevator. He heard it ding. He heard the doors close. He sat for a moment in the quiet floor with the drawing on the screen and the city outside the window, and he thought about load paths, the way force moved through a structure, finding the route of least resistance, following the architecture of the thing toward equilibrium. You could not fight a load path. You could only design for it. You could only build a structure that was honest about where the weight was coming from and clear about where it was going to go. People were not so different, he thought. The weight went where the weight went. The question was whether you'd built yourself something that could carry it. He went back to the connection detail. He finished the revision. He saved the drawing, shut down the workstation, and picked up his jacket. On the way to the elevator, he stopped at the south windows. Below, the city. The lake somewhere in the dark beyond it, present and enormous without being visible. The pinnacle site up in the near north, dark now but there. The steel beginning to find its way up from the ground, floor by floor, carrying its weight through the corrected path that Ryan had worked out on a kitchen table over a November weekend while his daughter slept in the next room. He stood there for a moment. Not long. just long enough. Then he went home to his daughter. There's a thing that nobody tells you about the moments when your life turns. They almost never announce themselves. They arrive wearing ordinary clothes on ordinary mornings. They look exactly like something you could walk past without noticing. A blueprint falls off a table. You stop to pick it up. You see something. You decide whether to say something, whether the truth matters more than the inconvenience of saying it, whether you're willing to be seen doing the right thing even when being seen has costs. Every day is full of those moments. Most of them are smaller than a blueprint on a Monday morning. But the structure they build in you, the person you become by what you choose in them, is what carries the weight when something real is finally resting on you. Ryan Calloway was a man who stopped to pick up a blueprint. He'd stopped for 3 years in smaller ways, picking up his daughter in the morning, making the pasta she liked, staying up late with legal pads and pencils, because he hadn't quite let go of what he was, even when what he was had no obvious use. Vanessa Whitaker was a woman who went to a parking garage herself, who came back and said, "I should have given you 30 seconds," and meant it, and let it cost her something, and didn't use the cost as a reason to stop. The building is going to stand for 100 years. The people who walk through its lobby will never know any of this. They'll just know whether the space makes them feel held or exposed, whether the weight has been properly carried, whether someone built the bones correctly. They will. That's enough.